Hello, friend. Thanks for joining me for another book chat. Today, let's spend a few minutes with The Landscape of History: How Historians Map the Past by John Lewis Gaddis. This is a work of nonfiction and it was published in 2002. So, yeah, have you ever stopped to think about what is history? Because really everything is, right? As each moment fades away into the past, it becomes history. And so, that's a pretty complicated endeavor. So, John Lewis Gaddis is a noted historian. And so he wrote this really, it sort of reads like an extended, maybe a big essay, an expanded essay about history. What is history? Mainly asking these two questions: what is history, how it's written, and why it's important to study it. So he uses a lot of metaphors in this book. So he kind of kicks us off with the book cover itself, which is actually a painting called "The Wanderer Above a Sea of Fog" by Caspar David Friedrich, and it was done, I guess, painted in 1818. So yeah, the wanderer above a sea of fog. So this could be kind of like a metaphor of looking out in the past, because the man there in the painting, you only see his back and he's looking at this cloud covered landscape, but there are these structures coming up out of the fog. And this is sort of a metaphor, I think, for one of his illustrations of what is history. And this is all right. So let me try to do my best to explain this book, because I'm not a historian, so I'm just read this as a sort of a layperson, so I'm not really qualified to teach the book. But let me just sort of explain what I took away from the book. Okay, so there are in history. He makes the argument here that history sort of is a science. It's a science in the sense of like paleontology. So he uses this metaphor for paleontology. So paleontology, works with bones, like prehistoric bones, fossilized bones, and things like that. So the Gaddis says here that history, as we make history, so like for example, let me use the example of this video. This video, as you're watching this video, I made this video, it became a relic. So it became a bone. It became a bone in the sense of paleontology. And the bones, so as the historian in 100 years from now might look at the YouTube videos and come across this one, and this one meets gives the historian of the future some sort of information about 2025, the year this video was made. And then maybe you have a comment to this video, and that comment also could be a bone, because maybe the comment is relevant to whatever this historian of the future is studying 100 years into the future. So both my video, it could be even the background in my video, but some aspect of this video, as well as your comment, would be a bone or a relic in the sense of history. Then the historian takes the relics, and creates structures. So he creates sort of a structure of something from the past. The structures then, once the historian sort of puts them all together, becomes what he calls a representation. So he makes this argument that history is a representation of the past. Of course, it's not the complete past. So another sort of metaphor that he uses is like a map, like a cartographer. So a historian, like history, if you were going to try to read a real history, an accurate history, it would be basically meaningless to you, because it would be so filled with minutia that you wouldn't be able to understand any kind of narrative, and there would be no perspective to it. It would just be so, like a map is only a map because it's a representation of something. So a map is not an actual photograph of the entire earth, as it is, because the whole earth in one photograph would become so jumbled, like you would have to take some sort of meaning from it, right? a map is a representation of a piece of the earth, a city or something like that, from some certain perspective, which is another thing he talks about as far as history is about perspective. So a structure, the structure exists regardless of the perspective, but the perspective on the structure can be different. So we could look at like a mountain, and there is a mountain, so that would be the structure. It would be combined, it'd be a bunch of relics, it'd be a bunch of rocks making a mountain. That would be a structure. And it's there, but then we could look at it from the north side, it might look a certain way. From the south side, it might look a different way. And so history is also this way. So he thinks that history is very rich in this way because the structures, the representations of the past can be looked at from many different perspectives, yet there's still a truth there. So he makes this argument that history is a science. It is not a social science. It is a real science. It is a science in the sense of paleontology, cartography, astronomy, these sort of sciences that use this same approach, which is take they don't have the whole picture. So in astronomy, there is not the whole picture of the solar system at once, or the cosmos or whatever. There is only part of it, right? The structures. But then the astronomer is able to infer certain aspects of the system from these structures. Likewise with paleontology, sometimes we don't have the whole structure. We don't have maybe the whole dinosaur skeleton. We only have pieces of it, sometimes very, very few pieces, but yet those are the structures. But yet the paleontologist is able to, through approaching it through a sort of a holistic view, and what we know about other things, can infer the missing things, and then you have a representation of that animal. This is how he's arguing that history works. Um, I do have a quote here about that. That sort of explains that. It says, for historians too start with surviving structures. This is sort of about paleontology. For historians too start with surviving structures, whether they be archives, artifacts, or even memories. They then deduce the processes that produced them. Like geologists and paleontologists, they must allow for the fact that most sources from the past don't survive, and that most daily events don't even generate a survivable record in the first place. So I thought this was really interesting, thinking about this as far as like most daily events don't provide a survivable record. So just think about your own life over the last since January, and what survives. Like if you were to recreate the last this year so far, how would you do that? Using relics, using things that you can actually put your hands on, not your memory. Because he makes the argument that, like, for any kind of structure of the past, like for example World War One, there's no one left alive that was an adult during World War One. There's no one there's barely anybody left alive from World War II. There's no one left alive from like the Civil War or the American Revolution. Lots of events in the past, obviously, most events in the past, everybody involved with those events have passed away. So there's no first-hand accounts anymore. There's only the relics that have managed to survive. So back to my illustration earlier about the video, this video is unlikely to survive into the future because most things don't. So it might survive for even quite a while, but at some point in the future, YouTube may decide to purge videos. YouTube may there may be a digital shift because there's new technology, and they decide not to move over old archived videos into this new technology, so it becomes inaccessible, this video. So it's very unlikely that this video would survive into the future, although it is possible that it would. So those things that manage to survive into the future then become very useful to historians, obviously. But like anything, like letters, things like that, books, letters, they become more rare with time because over time they just get lost, they get destroyed for whatever reason, they get they just get lost. All right. So I think I've talked enough about the how And the what is history. Let's talk briefly about what I think I took away from why study history. So he doesn't spend as much time on this in this book. But the way I understood it, and I did not write down this quote, but he basically says something like, the past is all we have for a database. So, like, we can't study humanity of the future. We can't even study humanity of the present because the present is always, every second, melting into the past. So we can kind of study where we are currently, but really only using the structures from the past. So I think he's making the argument that humans can only understand humanity by studying the past, because the past is really the only database that we have to study humanity. So by studying the past, you study the present because you come to understand humans better. You come to understand your own situation better, because that's the only way you have, is to study what has happened so far. You can project and project about what might happen into the future and how we would react to it. But how we would react to this projection is based on how we have done it in the past. We might say, oh, we need to do it differently, or we may need to say, this would work. This worked really well for us when this happened. But really, I think what I took from it mainly was the understanding piece. We understand ourselves better when we understand our past. So I think I will leave the chat with that. I did enjoy reading this a lot. I hope I did this book justice, because I did take a lot from it. I will have another chat coming up very soon though. So until next time, take care. Bye.